Hey everyone, welcome to my tutorial for driven keys in Maya. If you're in a rush and you just want to learn the process as quickly as possible, then click on the link that I'm going to be providing below. That's going to take you to the time code in which I'm going to be demonstrating how to set the driven keys. So if many of you out there are interested in learning about the complex driven keys rigging, let me know and I'll do my best to make more tutorials of this type. So here I have a simple example. So what is driven keys? Driven keys is a type of a rigging that you can apply, and it is ideal for robotic creatures or robotic or mechanical kind of movements. So I'll show you some examples so you would have an idea of how it is ideal to use driven keys. You know, I don't like rigging. I actually hate it and I hate scripting, but if there's something that I know about rigging, that means two things. It's easy and it's necessary. Otherwise, I wouldn't have learned it. So with that said, here is a simple example where I made an attribute called wheels, and it allows me to animate the wheels. And here is another example. It's a kind of a toy cannon. So for this prop, I made the following attributes: nose up and down for the cannon, whole body of the cannon up and down. I have right and left wheels for rotation and things like that. So here's one of the characters that I've created, and this one was super robotic. And I needed to use the driven keys for it, especially that I have a lot of moving parts and things like that. So I'm going to show you here briefly the rigging structure that I had for it. The first thing I had here was the master controller. And then after I made the rigging, I would make a copy of it and then export it as an asset with the rigging and everything. And then I would re-import it into all of these parts. So the master controller is just to carry everything. But this one here, this curve, is the controller that I've installed a lot of those attributes into it, so they would be turned into controlling attributes. Meaning that right now I have this first attribute, which is for leg spread, to extend this leg further and back. So I select on the channel and then with the middle mouse button, right and left. Then I have the piston movement. So you can see here I have this moving gear, and I also have these moving gears coordinated with this spring movement, which pushes that piston, which pushes the leg. And then I have the middle part, and I have right and left. The movement here was made by using parent constraint. So I had this ball and socket to be oriented towards the piece here, and then I had the piece here and also the piston here to be also oriented towards this one. So however each one of them moves, they're gonna be aiming at the other part. So that was a parent constraint. And then finally I have this up and down. But just going back here to this part, I want to highlight here this movement. This was also one of the complex pieces. And the beautiful thing about driven keys is that for fun, you can just have all of them to be working together. You can just select and drag. And then with the middle mouse button, you get that kind of action. All right, so driven keys are ideal for robotic pieces, such as this example here. The beauty of them is that, as you can see here, you can select multiple channels, and especially if you have all of those pieces together. So now that I have them selected, they all have the same attribute since they are duplicates. And lastly, on the menu for today's examples, I have this harvester. So this was pretty complex. I learned so much from it. It gave me a lot of headache, but it was worth it. If you liked it, and if you were really wondering how I made it, this is gonna take a kind of a long explanation, but I'm happy to go through it if a lot of people were very interested in knowing about it. All right, so here it goes. So how do we do driven keys? I think to explain it best, what I can do is I can break this example and then I can show you how I did it from scratch. So I'm gonna go into the nose and neutralize it. This is the piece that has the animation on it that is connected to the rigging. So I'm gonna go right mouse button, break connections. This piece here is the whole body. So I'm gonna break the connections here. And for the animation of the wheels, break connections, and now it should all be clean. So I'm going to erase those attributes that I don't want. I'm gonna select this, shift select this one, edit, and then delete attributes. Now that they are deleted, this is basically just a curve that I created. And to make my tutorial inclusive from A to Z, as you can see here, this is still connected. It's not a direct parenting, so what I'm going to do is to click on the group, unfold, and delete those parent constraints and scale constraints. So now this should be free to be erased. I can either go here and click circle, or I can go into the create and then NURBS, primitives, and then circle. It's the same thing. Click and hold J so it would snap, and then go to the orthographic view. So now it should be on the ground. I'm going to select that curve, shift select this piece, and then go to modify, align, and I want to align it to the center. And to make it easier to pick from the sides, from orthographic views, as you can see, this is a pro tip for rigging. So if you're looking from the side, you cannot really pick that curve. So it's ideal to just go right mouse button and then control vertex and maybe make some modification to it, however you want to make it. Now it's fairly easy to pick up. And if you want to change the color of that curve, you can always go Control A to go to the attributes editor. You can go to the NURB circle 1 and then go into display. And then in display, you go to drawing overrides. And here you can go enable overrides and you can change the color of that curve. Especially if you have a lot of props, then it would be kind of easier this way to pick the curve that you want. Okay, so with that said, before I turn this into the master controller, I'm going to modify, freeze transformation, then edit, delete by type history. Shortcut is Alt-Shift-D. And I'm gonna name it So as you can see, I have gone through the process backwards just to make sure that if you were in the situation where you need to erase some of the driven keys rigging progress that you've made, now you know how it goes, even to the point of explaining how to break parenting, whether it's regular parenting or constraints. Regular parenting, you just hit Shift P, but with constraints, it gets a little bit complicated. That's why you would need to go into the outliner here. And the last thing I need to clarify before I demonstrate how it is the process in which we lock and hide certain attributes. So if you have an object that you only needed to go in this direction, then for the purpose of making things organized and for you not to worry about other attributes, especially when you're doing the driven keys rigging, you just want to get rid of those other attributes. So that is something that I can simply just demonstrate on any object here. So let's say, for instance, I want to do some rigging for this piece and I don't really need to deal with anything other than translate. So I would select these, right mouse button, lock and hide. So when you do that, when you go and do the rigging, it would be a lot easier to pick those specific things that you want to do. But make sure you know exactly what you're doing here, because otherwise you would have to go through the hassle of restoring these things. It's not really that difficult, but it's kind of inconvenient. And to restore any attribute, you can just go into edit and then channel control. And then from the channel control, you can pick the things that you have hidden or locked. And then I can select anything here and hit S. It takes me to scale. So scale and rotation are the ones that I erased. So what I need to do is to move that here, because this is what actually shows in here. Click on move. And the reason why I'm showing you this process is because you also need to learn how to unlock. So let's say by accident you have locked and hidden certain attributes. So now you know how to restore them, and now I'm going to show you how to unlock. So right mouse button, you select those, and then right mouse button and then unlock selected. Now you're back to square one. So with this information now, I am sure that you wouldn't get into trouble even when you make mistakes. So that's my goal, just to make sure that you learn the whole process in a way that you would feel really confident doing all sort of driven keys. And the more you do it and the more comfortable you become at it, the more complex you can go into it. And trust me, it's a lot of fun, as long as you know what you're doing. All right, so with that said, now let's get into the process of rigging this cannon. The first thing I need to do is to identify the driven and the driver. This here is the driver. And please keep in mind that the driver and driven don't have to be geometry and curves. Even this can hold certain attributes to drive everything else. It doesn't matter, just to clarify. So this is the driver because it's going to be the object or the component that is going to have the added attributes in here. And just to give you an example about lock and hide, I don't really care about visibility. So right mouse button, lock and hide. I got rid of it. I don't want to see it, right? On the other hand, I want to add a new attribute here. So I select that driver and then edit and then add attribute. So on this one, I want to say, for instance, nose. I'm going to stick to the same names that I had before. Okay, so after you name it, you need to define whether this is the kind of thing that goes from 0 to 10 or 0 to 100, or it's the kind of thing that starts 0 as neutral and then goes to the maximum of 10 and the minimum of -10. So it's really a preference. So for me, in this case, I'll just make it from 0, which is all the way down, to 10, nose. And then I'm gonna make the minimum to be 0 and the maximum to be 10. So right now I'm only creating this attribute here. I'm not connecting it to anything. So before I continue, I'm going to go here. By the way, you can see here the gray axes. That's because they are locked before they're hidden. So they are locked. I cannot do any translation. That's what makes this lock and hide ideal for rigging. So this is the driven. So I'm going to set it to the 0. And make sure it's not piercing through the geometry. So this is what I want it to be as is 0. Now I'm going to select, I can select pretty much anything, but just as a habit, I'll select the driver and then go to one of these channels, whether it's this, one of these attributes, or anything. And then edit, set driven keys. In here, I would need to identify the driver. I select it, load driver. And this here is the driven. I select it, make sure it's the right one, then load driven. And that is why we do the lock and hide. You don't have to worry about anything like this. You know that it's just one thing to worry about, and that's going to be the rotation. So I'm going to connect the rotation here with the nose attribute. Now that I identified, I can hit Control and deselect or select. Now that I identified that this is connected to this, I go and select key. But before I do so, again, I want to make sure that it's corresponding properly. The nose is all the way down, and this is rotated all the way to the minimum. Now that I know that they're corresponding properly, I hit key. Now I go to the master controller, go to the nose, push it all the way up with the middle mouse button, or you can just push it this way with the left mouse button. Okay, so all the way to the max now, and then I would go to this and the cannon, and then I would push it all the way up. I want to be careful it doesn't pierce. And by the way, in case you didn't know, if you had issues like kind of controlling this and it's too tiny, you can always click the plus and minus on the numeric side, which makes animation and rotation a lot more precise and easy to make. And then minus, minus. Okay, so now it's gone all the way up. They're still connected, this with this. Also, making sure that this has the maximum, and now I click on key. So with that, I select the master controller now, I click on the nose, and then with middle mouse button, push all the way down or up. Very, very simple. Now, let's redo the process. What I want to do is to have this whole thing to be rotating, not this way, right? So right mouse button, lock and hide. This way I only have this thing to worry about. Alright, so this is the driver, and again, if you select up arrow, you would go up in the hierarchy here. And this is the driven, load driven. As you can see here, I don't have to worry about anything but this rotation. Actually, I need to create a new attribute. Okay, how do we create a new attribute? Edit, add attribute. Whole body, maybe. This time, just for variation, I'm gonna make it to -10, and the maximum is 10. Okay, which means that this here is going to be the neutral. I can make the -10 like this or the maximum like this. Let me give you another example later on, will be applied. The wheels, for instance, since it doesn't really matter where they stand as the neutral position, I would just go from 0 to 100 or 0 to 10. But in a case where there is a neutral position, then it's important to have minus and plus. So in this case, I'm going to make this to be the neutral. And I'm going to select the new attribute. So the whole body goes all the way to 10 and all the way down to -10. So again, back 0, So I'll push it all the way down to -10, and I'll push this to what I want to be the -10. Let's say this way. I would double check in here. So that looks good. This is good for -10. Now I'm going to select this as the driver and this as the driven. So rotate and then whole body. And again, I double check. This here is the right amount corresponding to the right orientation or rotation. And in this case, I hit key. Now I go to the master controller or the driver and I take this all the way up. And then I take this Canon whole thing to the maximum that I want it to be and hit key. So now I had the minimum and the maximum. So in this case, I would have the whole body ranging from here to here. In the meantime, I have the nose to independently be moving along with that controller. And lastly, I'm going to make the animation for the wheels. To simplify, as I mentioned in the original rigging, I had one for the right and one for the left, but just to simplify, I'm just going to make both of them to correspond to only one attribute. So here is the master controller, and then edit, add attribute, wheels, wheels with a Z to make it cool, then 0 to 100. Okay. So it doesn't really matter what position they're in, although they're on 0, which helps me on sticking to specific numbers. And you want to keep in mind that you know, their orientation might be different from one another. So just be careful that this one, for instance, here is going in the minus value. This one is going in the also minus value. So never mind. Okay. So here's the master controller. I'm going to select this wheels here, make sure that's all good at the 0, and these are at the 0. Okay. So I'll select both of these guys and load driven. And I'll select this one, load driver. So wheels along with the rotation for this guy here, key. And then I select also this one and select this and hit key. So I'm doing both of them together. Next, I select the master controller, go with the wheels all the way up to 100. By the way, in case you didn't know, if you want that incremental movement to be faster 10 times, you click and hold shift. And if you want it to be 10 times slower, you click and hold control. See? I'm giving you secrets here. All right, so taking it all the way up, select this, and I'm gonna make the rotation minus 5,000. And then this one here, I want to give it minus 5,000. Hit enter. And then keep in mind that we're doing both of these objects together. So rotate, wheels, key. Then here's the other one, rotate, key. And now it should be all good. Okay, wheels, whole body. And then nose. With that, I hope you have enjoyed this tutorial and have a nice day.